I'm investigative journalist Molly Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hey y'all, I'm Molly Barrows, and welcome to Gulf Coast Confidential, the podcast where we cover some of the most scandalous crimes and cases that bubble up here in Northwest Florida and beyond. Joining me to talk about these what the feezy cases, like we like to cover here, is Pam Hill. She is always our co-host here on Gulf Coast Confidential.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining us. And, you know, we do touch on some cases that happen around the country, around the world occasionally. But today we're talking about another one that is homegrown right here on the Gulf Coast.
Right.
Originated out of Mobile, Alabama, y'all.
Right, which is the Gulf Coast.
I know.
Gulf Shores, Fort Morgan, Orange Beach, Pensacola Beach, and Mobile. That's our Gulf Coast right here.
That's exactly. And we kind of touch on a lot of these little places in this particular story. This all centers around an interesting case that is just about as southern fried as you can get.
I think so.
In so many ways.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. It's complicated. It's also sensational. It's made national headlines. What is this that we're talking about? Well, this episode is called No Time for Nodine, the Angel Downs case, suicide or homicide. And so what I take away from this is really the question is being an arrogant womanizer a crime? No, but one Gulf Coast politician basically went to prison because of it. And this all happened on Mother's Day of 2010. 45-year-old Angel Downs, beautiful, blonde real estate agent, had the world by the tail, was found dead in the driveway of her Gulf Shores townhome with a gunshot wound to her head. She had spent the day at Pensacola Beach with her longtime boyfriend, Mobile City Councilman, as well as Mobile County Commissioner Stephen Nodine. He was more than 10 years her senior and married, but Angel was the only one that seemed to be really bothered by that fact. But was she so upset he wouldn't leave his wife to be with her that she would actually kill herself? Well, her family didn't think so, and neither did Mobile prosecutors, who ended up charging him with murder. So let's get into this case. That's a little bit of an introduction for those folks who aren't familiar. But again, this has made national headlines. It's been featured on 48 Hours, as Steve Nodine likes to go online and talk about constantly. So he's a character. Like, if you haven't seen pictures of him or seen interviews with him, he is blonde, blue-eyed, a fast-talking salesman is how I would describe him. He started out his political career as a city councilman in Mobile, then became county commissioner, and I think he'd only been county commissioner a little while when he met Angel Downs, and I think she was in her late 30s. And they were at the Mullet Toss. Mullet Toss, you ask? What is that? Well, this is another Gulf Coast tradition at the Flora-Bama, right there on the Florida-Alabama line on our beautiful Gulf Coast beaches. They had this annual mullet toss. They toss a fish, y'all, and it's a big deal, and people come down and they have a lot of fun and whatever. So this is where Angel Downs met Steve Nodine, and that started a 6-year affair. And I think initially he told her he was in a troubled marriage. He was planning to leave his wife. That never really happened. And then he finally came clean, and I guess she was in it to win it at that point and was in love, I think she thought, and just wasn't really ready to let go. And maybe that's the reason she killed herself. But there were a lot of people who did not think she killed herself, and that's why he ended up being tried for murder. So,
oh yeah, you can see both ways. And let's back up a little bit about the mullet toss, because it is epic.
It is epic. It's fun.
Right. One year the mullet gets tossed from Alabama to Florida. It's on the state line. And the next year from Florida to Alabama. Now, we here, we think mullet is a delicacy. We love it.
Mullet is pretty yummy.
Yeah, but it's the only fish that's got a little gizzard, and folks from other parts of the United States say, that's kind of bait.
It's a trash fish.
Yes, trash fish. So anyway, Mullet Toss brings in $40,000 plus for charities on both sides of the line. So it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And it's fun. But now we've got PETA I think yelling at folks about like, that's cruel to the mullet.
Well, they're not alive,
Yeah,
right?
no, they're not alive. And they donate them, I think, to the zoo and to places where it doesn't go to waste. But mullet toss is a big thing. So you got this beautiful blonde Barbie who loves the sun and the beach, addicted to the ocean, and living her best life over there in the Gulf Shores area.
Her friend said she was happy.
Oh, yeah. And she loved to exercise, so she's vivacious.
She's gorgeous.
Yeah,
I think they nicknamed her Barbie.
Yeah, they did. Beach Barbie. So, and she was born with the heart that was a little bit too big.
Oh.
Her heart was about the size of a 65-year-old man's heart.
Good gracious.
Yeah, so here's this beautiful, glamorous girl, got her own career, big old heart in both ways.
The exact opposite of the Grinch.
Yes, the exact opposite.
Whose heart was like many sizes too small.
Right. So she's the opposite. So she loved hard, and she it just enjoyed stuff. And then you got Stephen Nodine, by self-admission. He's like a loud, boisterous, big mouth guy. And he's like, look at me, look at me.
He is.
Yeah. But he was, people kind of found him, fun or acceptable or fun at parties or what have you.
No, they did. You're right. Mm-hmm. And now when I was reading up on him, and we can talk a little bit more, I've had a conversation with him before as well. Mm-hmm. But coming up in television news here in Pensacola, we basically just covered mostly Pensacola, unless there happened to be some big story in Mobile. Even though we're all technically part of the same market, there were several stations in Mobile. They mostly just covered Mobile and South Alabama. We mostly covered Northwest Florida. Occasionally there'd be some crossover if the story was big enough. Right. And this was one of those stories that there was some crossover. We covered it.
Oh, yeah. Well, we kind of peek over at their news, and they peek over at ours a lot, just by nature.
But people did say that he was, and that's the reason I brought it up, not to interrupt you, but that was what people said about him, was that he was very charismatic, that, the police chief, I think, over there in Mobile was like, yeah, when Steve walked in the room, everybody knew it, and he could be gregarious and fun-loving, and, and I guess if people like that loud, boisterous, it's all about me thing.
Right. Well, it takes pressure off other people, too. So there is... frat boy, older frat boy up there. And I mean, I can't help how I think. I just can't help. I'm like, what in the world were you thinking, Angel?
I know.
All the gorgeous men up and down the Gulf Coast, and the ones that could kind of, commit to you. Nobody wants to be second fiddle. And the thing is, this man, Steve, told her, I want everything. That's what he told. I want you. I want my wife. I want my life. I want to still be a county commissioner. I've got a child, and I want to come over on the beach on the weekends and do what I want. I mean, any one of those things for me that's a big no from me, dog.
I know. And it hurts my heart. And, and as a woman with mistakes in her past as well, I think in some ways I feel like a lot of women can probably relate to falling in love with the wrong person, or someone that may not be good for you.
Right.
But I think there comes a certain level of maturity and time that you say, okay, this isn't going to be good for me. I need to walk away. And I always did wonder why she never did really walk away sooner.
And to me, it was a little bit of just a ding on her character a little bit. And I'm not saying she didn't have good character.
We're not being judgmental, but it's nobody's going to like the other woman, the mistress. Right.
Open affair.
They didn't hide it.
Took pictures, went out and did the things. It's just like that case we did with Francis Hall.
Right.
He and his mistress took pictures and stuff. There's a certain thing you get to where it's so disrespectful.
It is disrespectful. And I was surprised to learn, too, that she'd even set up a room for his young son in her house. Yeah. I would say that if that had been my child and I was the woman that was being cheated on, I'd be like, get my son's name out of your mouth. Get my son's, you don't get to play mommy on the weekends with this wrong relationship, if you will.
I don't even think that was her thing. I think he's just like, he did what he wanted to. When he wanted to, where he wanted to, with whom he wants to. And then that is why things like this happen. That's not a good backdrop or a gumbo for anything good to happen out of.
I know, but by all accounts, she was very sweet.
Yes.
And her friends loved her, and I think they and her family were probably not wanting her to continue this relationship. I'm sure they saw that it wasn't good for her. And like you said, he had made it clear that nothing was going to change. And yet I imagine she still hoped that it would.
Right,
Apparently they
right.
had some kind of a connection. Maybe she, whatever, I don't want to be.
Yeah. Well, who knows? I just know how I am. And I wouldn't do that. But, I mean, people do stuff different all the time. But on the particular day that we're talking about where she was found dead.
Right, Mother's Day of 2010.
They'd been hanging out over here at our beach. Her friends had asked her to do something with them, and she kind of begged off a little bit, like, I'm sick. But then she went and spent the day with Steve Nodine over here in Pensacola. And so they were having a good old day, no fighting, no arguing, enjoying each other. But then what comes in my mind is like, it is Mother's Day. You have a wife that's the mother of your child. You're being disrespectful to everybody. Do you not care about being honorable at all? This is what bothers me about this whole story. You know?
Yes. Well, I mean, it does. It affects a lot of lives. And again, like you said, it's playing with fire. It's toying with people's emotions.
Right. So they go back over there to Gulf Shores, and they get home. And so she's in her condo apartment over there, and he has to leave. So she's like, oh, so you're going to go back to your wife. Well, we all knew this, and he's basically tuning her out. And so that's what he does. He gets in his little red truck, and he heads back to his wife.
But that's not all that happened that night.
That's right. That's not the destination, the next destination. He was driving back that way, and he was in his swimming clothes and everything. Probably, you know how it is. We get a lot of sand on us, and you feel sticky from the sun and the ocean and stuff. So he decided he was hungry. So he's going to stop somewhere and get something to eat. So he stopped by a golf club, probably has a country club with it, and they were closed. So he went down the road to a restaurant that was open, and he changed his clothes in the truck. So he went in there. He was going to go in there to eat, but I think he just decided he wasn't hungry, and he just drank coffee and water. And that's kind of important, I think, because it created a alibi or where he was. You know, I don't usually stop when I'm in my swimsuit and feeling yucky to just go sit in a country club or a restaurant and of all things, coffee and water. You can run through a McDonald's and do that.
Right. And supposedly at that point, he did not know that Angel had been killed. That, was a neighbor saw his red truck leaving and said, right when it was leaving, they had heard a gunshot, and her body was found at the end of the driveway with the gun right next to her body and a bullet hole that went through her temple, basically, and came out on the other side. And her hair, big, beautiful hair, was fanned out around her head, and that came up later in the trial. But yes, he apparently at one point did go back before she died.
Yeah.
He had thought that he had left his wallet, or he did leave his wallet, so he went back. She called her family and said she thought somebody was breaking into the house. I assume that was him coming back for his wallet. But anyhow, and then, it does sound as though there was some sort of tenseness over the wife again.
Right.
And then he leaves, and as he's driving off, the neighbor sees him driving off right after he hears this gunshot.
Right.
So part of that, I think, is why police were looking into it. And this is the part that I feel like is such a Southern tale. And I'm sure people cheat everywhere. I mean, cheating has been going on since the dawn of man, before they were still even completely upright.
Yeah,
I'm sure
don't worry your pretty little head about that. People cheat everywhere.
Right. Here a cheat, there a cheat. So at any rate, but they, to your point, they were not hiding it. And he had the big boisterous personality. They would eat lunch together openly in downtown Mobile. They attended social events together. There were pictures. And so I think a lot of people felt like that probably was disrespectful to his wife, to his family, to wholesome family values.
Angel.
To her family as well. Absolutely. And so with all of that going on, and then here she kills herself after 6 years, or so they say. That's
some folks think.
Some folks think that maybe that wasn't the case, that maybe he just was tired of the nagging or whatever the case may be. I personally feel like, and several experts have testified, that it does point to suicide, that there had been a previous attempt before, but she'd used pills. Her sister apparently doesn't buy that, if you will, because she feels like that was a very unbecoming way to take yourself out, and that Angel would not have wanted to be seen that way.
Yeah, her sister, Susan, she's a little Southern lady too, and she said, she just kind of thought about it for a second. She said, Angel was too vain, not in a bad way. She wouldn't want to be found like that. But and a sister would know that. I know things about my sister, and only a sister would know that. But I want to jump back a little bit to when they were coming home from Pensacola Beach, and he forgot his wallet. He went back in there, and at that time, I think she was talking to her sister on the phone and said, "Where would you shoot someone if they were coming in your house?" And she had left a message previous to that. And she said, her sister asked, is it Steve? She said, no, because he was right there. And then she texted her back, Stephen is here. So that's a little bit curious to me.
It is, but they'd also been imbibing that day, and toxicology tests showed that she had drugs in her system as well.
Right.
I mean, nothing.
Yeah. Well, she had Ambien,
Right.
Adderall, and another medication there. And the Ambien and the Adderall and the Xanax. Okay, all that with alcohol just it puts your blood alcohol and your intoxication way up there. And he had been doing the same thing.
Right. And neither one of them probably had their best thinking
Exactly.
in that condition.
And I feel like, this is just how I feel. I feel like he might have stopped at that restaurant to get water and coffee to sober up some.
Absolutely.
Before he went home.
Yes.
And, or like I said, he could have got it at a drive-through, but he needed some time. And also, I think.
Sober up.
Yeah. And he needed to have an alibi, too, if he shot her.
Right. And so he claimed that he did not hear the gunshot, that he had basically turned up his radio in the truck and continued to drive on. Personally, I do feel like she killed herself, and I wish that were not the case. I wish she hadn't done it. But I do think that he had it all. What was the motivation?
Yeah.
He even said it.
Yeah. Yeah, he did. And everything was going his way. I mean, why would someone change something when everything's going their way?
He had the girlfriend on the side. He had the wife. He had a son that he was proud of. He had a job that he loved. He had it all. Why would he, unless she was threatening to break up with him, and maybe there was like some jealousy, or, if I can't have you, nobody will. But he just doesn't strike me as that kind of guy.
No, he would be like, in my opinion, he'd be like, oh, well, see ya. I'll find somebody else.
I'll be back at the mullet toss for the next round.
That's right. Or I'll be over here for Labor Day. It don't matter.
Right.
So I just don't think that was that. But you're going to have to help me a little bit here on the what happens next.
The trial. Oh, my gosh. So I think that's what we're talking about. He had been well known. I think people were already sort of disdaining his behavior, if you will. And then when this happens, I think her family's outraged. Again, they don't like how he's treated her. They certainly have their suspicions about whether or not it was a suicide. It doesn't make sense to them. They want answers. The district attorney's office wants answers. And I think there's this feeling of maybe he really was such an a-hole that he did do this, essentially. So I think that it was his womanizing, arrogant ways that really made people zero in on this. And the fact that, you had the neighbor that saw the truck leave just right after the gunshot. He doesn't stop. He doesn't hear it. So he says, at any rate, this happened in May of 2010, and very quickly he is indicted for murder, and he is tried for it by December, and that's very fast in criminal terms.
Yeah.
And the DA thought that they had enough circumstantial evidence basically to convict him. They talked about. And this was some of the things that came out that were high profile in the trial. All the things that we talked about, they laid out the timeline of events, what the evidence showed, that there had been a previous suicide attempt on her part with pills, though. But, the prosecutor in the case talked about how she was laying there with that big, beautiful blonde hair fanned out around her and didn't think that was something that would happen if you were to shoot yourself. So she demonstrated it in court, and then her hair fanned out exactly
like it. Yeah, Judy Newcomb, the DA, she just knew that little courtroom stunt was going to say, look at this. She's been staged, because it was her gun by her right hand in her driveway with that hair splayed out like that, almost like a halo effect.
Yes.
And so she thought, well, I'm fixing to participate, and I'm going to do this little stunt right here in the Southern courtroom and show all y'all. Well, so she did it, fell back, and like I said, her hair splayed out, and she didn't have near the big, beautiful hair that Angel had.
I know.
So that was not good. But also the timing's quite curious about her. She went after Steve Nodine. There's only 3 county commissioners in Mobile, so they're very powerful. And you're well known. You're like a rock star over there. So,
or so they think.
yeah, right on. But but anyway, so Judy Newcomb, she's like, man, I'm the DA. And they said quite curiously, this all happened, just like less than a couple of weeks before re-election.
Right.
So, I mean, get this fish, get this Nodine fish. And so he was having to prove that he didn't do it and put him in a precarious situation. So the medical examiner said, I think his name was Dr. Hart. He said, this is inconclusive because he knew that lady did not want him to put suicide.
Right, that she wanted homicide on there. And it was interesting, too, because the gun, which should have been one of the key pieces of evidence, if he had pulled the trigger, you'd think there would be fingerprints, but there weren't. That had been wiped clean on accident.
Well, because they did a test on it, and the ding-dings wiped it off. That is one thing about cases. The people that collect the evidence and then handle it and without gloves or do a test on it and then don't respect the integrity of it, that's reasonable doubt with things. So people weren't liking what the ME was saying, inconclusive. So Judy Newcomb, she said, well, I'm going to go to Georgia and get me another doctor to come back. And he came back and he said homicide.
That's exactly right. She got the answer that she wanted. And I think that's one thing that Steve Nodine has consistently said, that he felt like it was a political prosecution.
Yeah.
Mind you, every excuse that he gives, everything comes back to him. He said that they didn't even care about Angel. They just cared about attacking him. But I think that's just typical for him, too, to make it all come back to him. But I do think he is right in as much as nobody really liked him and they wanted to hold him accountable for this.
Yeah, or somebody's going to pay. Somebody's going to pay. This is beautiful Gulf Shores. We don't like stuff like this going on.
Right, and why is the sweet, beautiful young woman dead and not the ogre, if you will? Because in one article he's done recently reacting to, of course, this case got featured in many news magazine shows, true crime shows, and he referred to himself as the ogre and the princess, and I don't think he's wrong.
No, well, he's kind of like sees how it is there, but so they had a trial and. Of course, the jury couldn't agree on it.
Yeah, it was a hung jury. And basically for 4 months, he was a free guy. But then there was this federal gun charge that he faced because he had basically smoked weed that day. And even though his gun was in Mobile, 90 miles away, they pulled this charge together. So he was, I think, behind bars for about a year. And that's when Hallie Dixon, the newly elected district attorney, had to decide if she was going to retry him again. She brought together a new grand jury. They determined that he was not going to be charged with murder, but they did indict him for criminally negligent homicide. That meant that he is essentially partially responsible for her death. But Angel's family was supposedly very upset by that decision. They wanted to see him prosecuted for murder. So they went over Dixon's head to the Alabama Attorney General. They got a special prosecutor appointed, and this new prosecutor took the case over and decided to retry Nodine for murder. And so everybody's preparing for this trial, but then they decided not to do it. They made a plea deal instead. The state of Alabama actually dropped the murder charge against Steve Nodine, and in return, he pled guilty to perjury for lying on a legal form. And he also pled no contest to a harassment charge for allegedly harassing her over emails and text messages. So he was sentenced to 10 years, but he only spent 2 of them behind bars. And during those 2 years, he spent apparently a lot of nights and weekends at the county jail doing legal work, essentially. And then he ended up, I guess, back behind bars again.
Yeah. Well, when he was having to serve that 2 years in jail, he could do work release. So he was working for his lawyer, which was right across the street. I mean, just across the street.
Again, so Southern.
Yes, right. There it is, like the Atticus Finch law firm. But across right there. And his thing was, you have a curfew, man. get back over here. Well, he just missed
He's above the
it.
law.
Yeah, he just missed it because crossing the street takes a lot of time. But he didn't get over there. So then after that was a series of failed drug tests when he got out. He left the state without permission. He went over to New Orleans for a job interview and just decided he's going to stay and see a Saints game. Well, you can't be doing that. This is not your thing to set up.
Always pressing the envelope.
Right. So he got 60 days there. And so after all that, he said, I can't find a job here in Mobile. And so he came over here to Florida.
Yeah, he's living here in Pensacola Beach now.
Yeah.
We're going to get to that in a second.
Yeah. And he has some DUIs and some expense accounts that he kind of inflated, and even going down to, when we had that BP oil spill, he had gone to like the office of that, and was inebriated and showed his tail, and they're like, get out of here. And then just a lot of just like sort of, I don't even know what obnoxious is the word.
Agreed.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So there we are.
Right. And I think it was that obnoxiousness that probably led to the enthusiasm of these multiple prosecutions. But at the same time, if you're doing wrong, you're going to get, I'm sure for her family, they're devastated. They feel like justice was not served. And that does break my heart for them. And as far as Nodine, he, again, continued to say that all that pressure from prosecutors was because of politics. And that's why he took the plea deal. He's basically comparing himself to Trump in a lot of ways, basically saying that he's been unfairly prosecuted. He thinks it's kind of stems from this Republican versus Dems sort of thing. I think that's all crap. I think that's just trying to take attention away from what you are responsible for. But he did tell this one publication, he's like, quote, how do you go from murder to then felony murder to criminal negligent homicide to dropping everything? I was not charged with domestic violence, as they said. The deal was I would not plead to anything to do with Angel Downs' death. So they came up with this Alford plea for harassing communications because we texted before and we got into a big argument about me not getting a divorce. So that's basically what he was charged with.
They were going to charge him with something. And I understand how Angel's family feels because they know, seriously, she had everything in the world going for her if she would just get rid of him.
I know. And it makes me sad that sometimes I feel like we make decisions when we're not feeling the best about ourselves or maybe don't feel like we deserve more. Yeah. And she certainly was worthy of much more than him.
Oh, yeah. And she was doing great in her career and living in paradise where she wanted to live. Good family that loved her to pieces. 3 sisters and a brother and family. And just everything. I certainly do understand how they would think differently. I get that.
Yes, I know. And I know that hurts my heart. And I think even he recognizes that that's part of the reason why they came after him. If he had just taken responsibility and maybe shown some more remorse. But I think he has expressed remorse, but it's the same way he expresses everything else.
Yeah,
it's really about him. And, I started looking into this a couple of years ago when I first started Gulf Coast Confidential and focused a lot on the local cases before we sort of expanded outside of those boundaries. But this was such a huge local case for so many years. He has stated in interviews that he loved her or cared about her and felt like she was sweet and more beautiful than he deserved. And I think we can all agree on that. But, he did. That being said, when I was looking into his comments on social media, and I'll read you a little bit about what he said, it still comes across with that twang of, what about me? What about me? What about me?
I'm tired of that.
Right. So in one that he sent in February of 2022, this is one of his tweets. He said, sometimes bombs go off you can't control. Avoid toxic relationships. Learn to have joy and love as friends a year or two first.
Who's he talking to?
He is talking to somebody. He's replying to someone named Cassie Fambro.
Yeah. But in general, you don't even love that woman enough to get a divorce and be with her. And I tell you what, I think of that saying. It says, if they do it with you, they'll do it to you.
Sure.
So, this is not a good man. Let him go. And, or just...
Not a family man.
Yeah.
Even his wife let him go.
Right,
I think after he was, sentenced to prison or sentenced to jail, she left him.
Yeah, well, bless her heart, she probably was just trying to minimize damage because
for her
she
family.
didn't do anything wrong.
No,
I know. And he's the one that's married.
I know.
He's the one that's being untrue and loving it, rolling around in it. Who wouldn't? What man or woman wouldn't think I am the shiznit?
I
if
know.
that's going on
and
in
that's,
my life.
Again, partially, I don't think he killed her. I think he had too much going on, considering,
Just leave her alone. Just leave her alone.
And he did say that. He said, I should have left that relationship a lot sooner. And I think that's absolutely true. But he did. He reached out to so many people, especially because this case was featured on 48 Hours. Over and over, he reaches out to 48 Hours online, other news organizations that have covered this. And he's always like, just wanted to thank you for your work. My 48 Hours Power and Passion. I was wrongfully accused of murder and had a so-called expert tried their best to frame me. Dr. Jamie Downs was hired by the state because the state did not believe their own forensics. Here's another one. He's talking to somebody and he says, hey there, youngster. Hope all is well. Former 48 Hours alum here in Mobile, Alabama. Power and Passion, again, the name of the show, but can't do Amazing Race like Ryan Ferguson. Hope you're well and thanks for being fair in my story. And I mean, over and over, these are just a couple of the examples. And here's another one. He's Ricky Gervais, the comedian. Love all your productions. Afterlife hit home as lost my girlfriend 12 years ago, and Afterlife was best therapy. I was accused of killing her. Parentheses, CBS, 48 Hours, Power and Passion, so could never grieve the way you showed us in Afterlife. Thanks, RG, and F the critics. It was simply the best. So he basically reaches out to all these celebrities because I think in his mind he is one.
Well, he used to rub elbows with the Republicans. He really he thought Gerald Ford was the bomb after Watergate, and he has pictures with President Bush and a few other people, maybe Newt Gingrich, I think I saw there. But I think he has delusions of grandeur.
Amen.
And I really think, how can one say, hey, look back at Power and Passion here. I was falsely accused. Way to miss the whole effing point.
I mean, it's
Angel
terrible.
is dead. Way to miss the point. And you think people bring up your past. You're bringing up the past, but you're trying to narrate it how you want to. This story makes me mad.
I know. And if I were her family, that would just kill me.
Yeah, that's
that
why I can identify with them. Because I feel like she might have been taking the Xanax and alcohol just to deal with this. But I also wanted her to get out of it.
Absolutely.
What do we have to do to empower women to go, he's not the only man walking around, and he's older than you. He's lying to everybody. This is not a good person.
Right.
Do you not want good people in your life?
Right.
I don't
Is
understand.
the sex that great? Is the relationship that great?
Well,
I mean, I got to say no. It reminds me of the old Eddie Murphy stand-up when he was like, was that a Ritz cracker? And not to be crude, but I'm like, to your point, like it there has to be a choice that you make as a person that says, this relationship isn't good for me.
Right.
It's causing me more harm. It's upsetting me more than it's helping me. I need to walk away. And it's not said with judgment. I think we've all been there. We've all made plenty of mistakes. I live in 1,000 glass houses that have been cracked and shattered,
Well, and it's delicate when you're trying to tell a friend something, especially if it's romance or something, because they'll think, well, you're just picking them apart or this, that, and the other. Well, I'm not picking this apart. You are married with a child 15, 20 miles that way.
You have a relationship. You are not free to give me what I need to be in a relationship.
That's why her family, I think, is so hurt. And because they tried. They're a good family and they loved her. And they were probably trying to do everything they could to get him to move on down the road.
Right. And then here the relationship ends with her death and he just continues on and is tweeting to 48 Hours. Remember me? Remember me?
Yeah, we do remember you. And you're very dishonorable.
Absolutely. Well, now he is living here in Pensacola.
Right.
You can visit his Facebook page and you can see some pictures that he posted in January of a fall that he had after apparently giving a homeless fella that he had made a relationship with, or so he said in the post, that he was giving him a coat and some food or whatever.
London Fog coat, his.
I thought that that same thing. I was like, why do you have to mention it's a London fog code?
Because it's London fog.
I know. I mean, the guy's just happy to get warm, and you have to pat yourself on the back. And I think about,
stop doing that.
Basically, if you're doing something good, do you have to celebrate it?
Yeah.
Are you really doing it for the right reasons?
When that man, you're not helping his self-esteem, do it. Just do it because it's the right thing to do.
And then he takes a picture of himself with the guy. Yeah. And then, again, this is all, there was another local article that was done about it, but it said it's unclear how he fell. He basically said that it was January, so of just this year, there'd been ice and, cold or whatever around, but it had cleared out by that time. So he fell, and I did notice he put up another post recently saying that fall has caused him some problems with his head since then. And I don't know, it just all seems a little strange. Yeah, but he said that he's enjoying living in Pensacola, according to his Facebook page. I did reach out to him on Facebook because he does seem to be fairly active on that page, and I messaged him to see if he wanted to comment about how he was moving on with life, if there was any lessons to be learned, of how he was moving forward. And I didn't hear back. So
yeah, well, I mean, I wish him well.
Absolutely.
But I not at the expense of Angel's memory, and not at the expense of moving himself. Way to miss the point every time. Shut up about that if you're not going to be honorable about Angel Downs.
Absolutely.
Move on. Quit politicking. We don't want you over here as no county commissioner. We got our own. We got stuff going on.
Girl.
Leave ours alone.
Go
back over there. But the thing is, stop being disrespectful to this lady.
Yes, absolutely. Well, this is an interesting story, and people continue to be interested in it. And, it's a cast of characters for sure.
And it makes me mad.
I know. Well, it does me too. I hear you on that one.
You're better. You're more professional than I am. I'm not going to be like,
I don't know. I've been trying to tame my tongue. I'm not always good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Pam.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of Gulf Coast Confidential. That is it for No Time for Nodine, the Angel Downs case, suicide or homicide. I'm your host, writer, and producer, Molly Barrows, with co-host and researcher, Pam Hill. And a big thanks, as always, to our director, editor, and production engineer, James Roy. And remember, you can listen to more of our Gulf Coast Confidential conversations wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. You can also watch on the Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, y'all.
Subscribe. It's free. It's calorie free.
And it doesn't hurt at all.
Right.
We'll see you next time.